Let's go overseas now, because China has never militarily been stronger than it is right now. And we keep hearing that this might be the year that finally Xi Jinping fulfils the promise he's been making to his people for years now, that he will take back Taiwan, an independent nation of 25 million people. President Xi Jinping says no one can stop China's reunification. He said the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are one family. No one can sever our family bonds. Now, no one, he said, can stop the historical trend of national reunification. Now, whether he's got his history right or not is a questionable thing. Taiwan was the island of Formosa off the coast of China and never was part of mainland China. So it is an independent nation, has been for a long time now, and it's been a democracy for a long time now. And there is a commitment by the Americans to defend Taiwan if Taiwan is attacked. We're in the ANZUS Treaty, so if America decides to respond militarily if Taiwan is attacked, then does that commit Australia sending whatever forces, whatever support we can do? Does that mean our relations with China end up in an appalling mess because China decides to take military action? Could 2025 be that kind of dangerous year, Will?
It could. I think this is something which the West has their head in the sand about. Xi has said this is going to happen. He's told his military generals that he wants to be ready by 2027. I think that sort of time frame is more likely. But I don't think we're taking this threat seriously. The one nuance I would say about this whole thing is I don't think this is necessarily a boots-on-the-ground invasion. I think it's something closer to an economic blockade. And I don't think the response is necessarily a military response. It will probably be the Trump-style economic tariff, economic warfare or cyber warfare that he's been floating. But the fact remains, this is probably the most serious threat that not enough people are talking about.
Yes, we're not talking about it, we're not thinking about it, and yet we kept seeing during last year, we saw incursions into Taiwanese airspace repeatedly by Chinese military aircraft. I mean, are we likely to actually see a war in our region that Australia becomes involved in 2025?
I really hope that we're not. And I think the reason why we're perhaps not talking about it more is because there's wars going everywhere in the world at the moment and people are sick of war. I'm sick of war. I'm sick of, wanting to be involved in wars, particularly as a nation. I think what makes things like this really difficult is the fact that we're allies with different people. And I mean, you only have to look at World War I and World War II to see how alliances are literally shaped like so much, particularly in World War II. And I just think, to be honest, that the US and Australia, we're not the hall monitors of the world. And I do think to a degree we have to be very careful. And I'll just finish this point. I know you look very desperate to say something, Will. But I just want to make this point. Our number one alliance should be America. Yet we've been in a military alliance with them since the 50s. Without them, we have no hope against China. So that's a very important relationship that we need to hold on to. But I will say this. Whilst China is a communist nation, not a democratic nation, and whilst China, is, I wouldn't say our friend or so, I think we need to be very careful because China have built concrete islands just north of the Philippines. If they wanted to, they could go there and send bombs that would hit our shores over here. Not only that, I think that we would tread very carefully due to our trade agreements with them. I don't agree with any of these, by the way, mind you, but stupidly, our politicians have set our country up so we're not self-sufficient. So we rely on these stupid things like this. So I just think we need to be really careful to not warmonger, to not try and get involved in wars like this, and perhaps wait in our wisdom as a nation to see what happens. I hope that when Trump comes into power...
Our treaties won't always let us wait. If a treaty is activated...
Well, maybe we need to reassess our treaties.
Well, if we've signed a treaty, we're committed to it. And when the treaty is activated, it's activated. It's a bit too late then to say, oh, well, we weren't too sure when we signed it. We didn't really
Well, times change. Like, you can't, like, if you have one treaty, like, I think history shows that
this isn't the point.
Change.
This isn't the point. There are two things we need to consider. Number one, there are just wars and there are wrong wars. I mean, going into the Middle East in the early 2000s was a waste of time, and that was obviously the wrong decision. This is the right war in the area of the world where there is a small democratic nation that is being bullied by a dictatorial, authoritarian, awful regime. The Chinese are not our friends. They are our greatest geopolitical foes. Make no mistake, they are an awful, ugly,
thought
nasty.
Russia was.
Well, no, they're not. No.
That's what a lot of people are saying.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they are our greatest geopolitical foes. Even if you don't agree with me on principle, the practical side is we cannot afford to let them invade Taiwan. And there's there's one very simple reason for that, and that is that Taiwan has 90% of the world's semiconductors manufactured in that country. If China takes control of that, then your iPhones won't be available by the time that is over.
Maybe that's a good thing. The world will be cleansed.
Come on, mate. I'm sorry, but the modern world runs off those semiconductors, and unfortunately, we're about 5 or 6 years behind being able to manufacture those in the West. If that happens, that is catastrophic for the Western world.
Well, this is a real big problem for Australia.
People involved who are living in a democracy, 25 million, roughly the size of Australia. They have a democracy. They have freedom. We saw what happened in Hong Kong. China came in with the end of the agreement with the United Kingdom, and they took over Hong Kong and they signed a thing called the Basic Law, and they said there will be one country, two systems. They just broke the law. They ignore that. There is no freedom in Hong Kong now, and people who were campaigning for freedom and campaigning for liberties were people who are now in prison these days in Hong Kong. The same thing would happen to Taiwan, and we need to decide whether we as a country are prepared to sit back and do that. But Trump is a bit of a dove rather than a hawk. Would he get involved?
Well, this is where the short answer is I think he would, but whether that is a military intervention is an interesting question.
Do you think his mere presence is enough?
I think much more so than Biden. Absolutely right. And I think we were talking about this earlier in the week. The concept of strength, of deterrence through strength is really important.
Well, look what happened with Russia and Ukraine as soon as Trump came in.
Exactly.
It's the first time talk of peace in a long time.
I'm much more comfortable that the Chinese will not intervene in Taiwan with a Trump presidency compared to a Harris presidency.
And I hope that happens so that we in Australia don't really have to get involved, because to be honest, I think for a really long time, a lot of Australians, particularly political parties like One Nation, have been saying we need to stop relying on countries like Taiwan for making conductors, so that when something like this happens, we're in a better position to put Australia first.
But I would tell Pauline Hanson it's not easy to make semiconductors. We're not going to be able to do it in Broken Hill anytime soon.
But we have an incredible country with a lot of people, with a lot of resources, a lot of space. We have so many capabilities.
Can't do that in the short term. In the short term, when it comes to 2025, we need to decide.
I know, but
we have
to talk about it now so this doesn't happen again.
We can't do it in the long term either. I know that the world is getting more isolationist. I know that we need to put Australia first, but we can't completely ditch the idea of trade. We can't completely ditch the idea of comparative.
But it should be limited.
Sure.
And it should be used with discernment.
Sure, I agree. But I just don't think we say, let's do everything in Australia and she'll be right.
But based off this logic, though, we could potentially get into war with, so many different nations across the world because we go, oh, well, we need this. At some point in time, we have to go, yes, that's really horrible that the poor, people in Hong Kong have had to suffer like that. That's awful. But you know what? My family, my kids come first.
I agree.
I'm sorry.
I agree. But if there is one war in the next decade that we think is the right war to fight, then this is the one.
Well, it can sound a bit bleak, and you can feel it's a little bit bleak. You shouldn't, because I think we agree that the fact that Trump will be in the White House is more likely to make other people nervous, other people think again.